Kridan, while engaged in his pastimes. Vane, in the forest of Vrindavan. Nishi, nocturnal. Nishakara, the moon. Rashmigoyam, white moonshine. Rasa Anmukaha, desiring to dance with. Kalapadayata, accompanied by sweet songs. Murchchitena, and melodious music. Uddipita, awakened. Smararujam, sexual desires. Vrajabrit, the inhabitants of Vrajabhumi. Vadunam, of the wives. Hatur, of the kidnappers. Harashyati, will vanquish. Shirha, the head. Dhanada Anugasya, of the follower of the rich Kuvera. Translation. When the Lord was engaged in his pastimes of the rasa dance in the forest of Vrindavan, enlivening the sexual desires of the wives of the inhabitants of Vrindavan by sweet and melodious songs, a demon of the name Shankachuda, a rich follower of the treasurer of heaven, Kuvera, kidnapped the damsels, and the Lord severed his head from his trunk. When the Lord was engaged in his pastimes of the rasa dance in the forest of Vrindavan, enlivening the sexual desires of the wives of the inhabitants of Vrindavan by sweet and melodious songs, a demon of the name Shankachuda, a rich follower of the treasurer of heaven, Kuvera, kidnapped the damsels, and the Lord severed his head from his trunk. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. We should carefully note that the statements described herein are the statements of Brahmaji to Narad, and he was speaking to Narad of events that would happen in the future during the advent of Lord Krishna. The pastimes of the Lord are known to the experts who are able to see past, present, and future. And Brahmaji, being one of them, foretold what would happen in the future. The killing of Shankachuda by the Lord is a more recent incident after the Rasa Leela, and not exactly a simultaneous affair. In the previous verses, we have seen also that the Lord's engagement in the affairs of the forest fire was described along with his pastimes of punishing the Kaliya snake. And similarly, the pastimes of the rasa dance and the killing of Shankachuda are also described herein. The adjustment is that all these incidents would take place in the future, after the time when it was being foretold by Brahmaji to Narad. The demon Shankachuda was killed by the Lord during his pastimes at Horika in the month of Falguna, and the same ceremony is also observed in India by the burning of the effigy of Shankachuda 1 day prior to the Lord's pastimes at Horika, generally known as Holi. Generally, the future appearance and activities of the Lord or his incarnations are foretold in the scriptures. And thus, the pseudo incarnations are unable to cheat persons who are in knowledge of the events as they are described in the authoritative scriptures. Umaginati mirandasya giranjana shalakaya chakshurun militam jena tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Parakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Visakan Vitamscha. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagat Pate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Brindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanshakaupa Dhruvyascha Kripasindo Vaevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschachade Shatarane Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Lagya Yati Girim Jatkripa Tamaham Vande Shri Gurundina Taranam. I was just reflecting on the chanting of the Mangala Charan. Our God Sister Govinda Dasi explained once that Srila Prabhupada told her that if you chant this Mangala Charan before you do anything, whatever you do will turn out well. So I was especially thinking that this morning when I chanted the Mangala Charan, because this purport to me is actually quite a mystery, because I don't really see the point that Srila Prabhupada is making here. Well, I see several points that are alluded to, and I think perhaps the most important point is that Lord Brahma is speaking to Narad from the position of an expert who has what is called Trikala Gya. He can see the past, the present, and the future. And the point I think about this verse that strikes me the most is that if you read Krishna book and 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, this little pastime of Krishna, of Shankachuda trying to kidnap the gopis, and Krishna and Balaram pursuing him. Well, Lord Balaram stays behind to look after the gopis after Shankachuda leaves them, when he becomes bewildered by Krishna and Balaram chasing him, and then Krishna goes on and captures him, and with one punch, as it says here, severed his head from his trunk. And then he takes the jewel that Shankasuda is carrying on his head in the shape of a conch shell, and then he brings that back and he gives that to Lord Balaram. In Krishna book, that pastime takes no more than a page and a small paragraph. It's a very, very small incident in the whole of the 96 chapters of Krishna book, or which are the 96 chapters of the 10th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. But what it indicates is that expert devotees on the level of Lord Brahma, with this potency to see past, present and future, see everything in very great detail. They don't miss a single detail. Everything is revealed to them in their trance-like state. And that trance-like state is achievable to see the pastimes of the Lord in such detail by being fully linked in the process of devotional service. This is similarly described in the 7th chapter, beginning of the 7th chapter of the 1st canto, where after Narada has given his instructions to Vyasa in the 5th and 6th chapters, then the sages, headed by Shonaka, asked, well, what did Vyasa do after Narada left? And then there's this description of how he also entered into a trance-like state, and linking that trance-like state to his devotional service to the Lord. It's a very interesting little detail, that he was in a trance-like state, but he linked his trance to the devotional service of the Lord. And then he saw the Lord, and behind the Lord, immediately standing behind the Lord, he saw the material energy. And then from there on, in that deep trance state, linked to his devotional service, he saw all the pastimes of the Lord being revealed. I once read a book by a man called Milton Erickson, who was a very, very famous hypnotherapist. And the idea of trance is something which is very much related to hypnotherapy. And he was asked, how do you put somebody in a trance? And he said, you don't. You can't put anyone in a trance. He said, everybody's in a trance. What you have to do in order to have any influence over them is to shift the focus of their trance. To shift their focus, the focus of their trance. So this is our position. We're coming from an entranced state, under the influence of the three modes of material nature, under the influence of the false ego. Ahankara vimudatma. We are bewildered by the influence of the material energy, and we are in a trance-like state under the influence of the three modes of material nature. We have become entranced by Maya. So how do you act? So we're in a trance. All the living beings in the material world are entranced by Maya. So how do you make them become entranced by Krishna? You have to shift the focus of their trance from Maya to Krishna. And the shifting of the trance, of the focus of the trance from Maya to Krishna, is achieved by the process of devotional service, centered upon hearing the pastimes of the Lord. It's a gradual process, because the living entities in the material world as Srila Prabhupada explains, have been pursuing material desires since time immemorial. And that conception has to change. And it can only be changed by hearing from authoritative sources. That word is used here, described in the authoritative scriptures. And Lord Brahma's particular qualification to exercise his ability to see past, present, and future. You don't have to be a devotee of the Lord to have the ability to see things in the past, in the present, and in the future. But you have to be a devotee of the Lord to see the details of the pastimes of the Lord in the clarity which Lord Brahma is revealing here in bringing out this very small pastime, this very small little event that occurred, that we see in Krishna book, as I say, it takes a page and a half to describe. And with the word for word and the translation in the 10th canto, it's maybe 3 or 4 pages. 3 or 4 pages. Very, very small thing. So he's very expert in seeing these things because of his devotional service to the Lord, because of the caliber of his devotional service to the Lord. Not because he's a mystic who can see past, present, and future. All kinds of people have this power amongst the sages and even the demigods. They have this ability. But what are they seeing is qualified, or their ability to see is qualified by their devotional service to the Lord. Bhaktya mam abhijanati javan jasyasmi tattvataha tato mam tattvato gyadva vishate tadanantaram. Only by devotional service am I to be understood as I am, standing before you as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Arjuna says, Krishna says to Arjuna, only by devotional service. You may have so many other abilities, but if you don't have devotional service, if you don't have bhaktya, love for the Lord, then you don't see. You see, but you don't see. That's why Prabhupada is at great pains to explain that when Krishna was present on this planet, so many people saw him. Millions and millions and millions of people saw him. But very few people understood who he was standing before them. And they were the most intimate devotees of the Lord. Actually, there's a story in the Mahabharata how Duryodhana he hatched a plan to lure Krishna to a conference just before the Battle of Kurukshetra and arrest him. He thought, we got to take Krishna out of the equation because he's just too unpredictable and he's too powerful. But he wasn't understanding the actual nature of the Lord. And so he lured him to this gathering and then tried to have him arrested. And immediately Krishna made a partial manifestation of the universal form, and everybody was totally confounded by that. And then he just left. So Trikalagya is a yogic city. So many yogis have this ability, but they therefore, or rather, that does not therefore mean that they have access to the intimate details of the pastimes of the Lord. There's a beautiful statement at the end of the film Vrindavan, Land of Krishna, which says that the exchange of love between the Lord and his devotees is tangible and real, but to the outsider it remains a mystery. It cannot be understood. One cannot get any access to anything about the Lord unless it is by the mercy of a pure devotee of the Lord, unless one is actually ushered into what is called the most confidential knowledge. The most confidential knowledge. It is a privileged position. The word privilege means prive means private, and lege means law. There's common law, and then there's the privileged law, the law of privilege that applies to certain people. The common law applies to the common people, and the privileged law applies to people who have a particular standing in society. So that standing in the society of the Lord himself is only achieved by the process of devotional service. Now we're in this chapter called Scheduled Incarnations of the Lord, so that as the last sentence of this purport says, generally the future appearance and activities of the Lord or his incarnations are foretold in the scriptures, and thus the pseudo-incarnations are unable to cheat persons who are in knowledge of the events as they are described in the authoritative scriptures. The pastimes of the Lord are not imaginary. This is a particular challenge in the world today, because thanks to the very organized social engineering that was inflicted upon India by the British, there is the idea that these pastimes of the Lord are myth, that there is no Krishna, there is none of these pastimes. These are all just stories. And actually, they extended that. The British extended that all the way across all of the stories of the, which are actually stories of the demigods from the Greek culture and the Middle Eastern culture. They put it all in this basket. It's all mythology. But if it's mythology, then what's the point? Well, then it's open to all kinds of speculation. But the central missing thing in this extravagant claim that it's all mythology is the denial of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the denial that Krishna exists. And as I said there, the exchange of love between the devotees and the Lord is tangible and real. And it cannot be denied. An external person may see it as a mystery and deny it. But actually, devotional service and hearing about the appearance and activities of the Lord is a very privileged position. We need to understand this about our own lives. We are in a very, very privileged situation. What is that Prabhupada says about, there's one example he gives about how the possibility, well, first of all, the human life is very, very rarely achieved. But then Srila Prabhupada gives the example of how coming in contact with a pure devotee of the Lord, having that encounter in your sojourn through the vastness of the material creation, the possibility of that happening is like the possibility of a turtle breaking the surface of the ocean to get some air just at the point where he puts his head through the knothole of a piece of driftwood in the vastness of the ocean. That kind of synchronicity, that kind of encounter is very, very rare. And we owe it all to the activities of a pure devotee of the Lord. in the Bhagavad Gita, at the end of the 8th chapter, Srila Prabhupada explains how it behooves one to seek out a spiritual master. But actually, if we look at what actually happened in our lives, the spiritual master found us. The spiritual master came to us. So that is a very, very rare thing. In an interview with one of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's disciples, is it Ananda Krishna Maharaj? Babaji? Ananda Krishna Babaji? Where B.B. Govinda Maharaj interviewed him. And he said, actually there's no greater acharya than your Srila Prabhupada. And B.B. Govinda Maharaj was really surprised to hear that from Prabhupada's godbrother, who was a disciple of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. And he questioned him, but you're a disciple of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. How can you say that? He said, well, because Srila Prabhupada has done something that no one else has ever done. He's taken the holy name to every corner of the world. He's taken the holy name to every corner of the planet. That is unprecedented in the history of Vaishnavism. Unprecedented. And as a result of that, he's opened up our lives to the most privileged information, the most confidential knowledge. And that simple, most confidential knowledge is that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In the 5th chapter of the 1st canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, there's a verse where Narad is explaining to Vyas that first of all he says the Supreme Lord is unlimited, and then he says, and you are particularly qualified by virtue of the fact that you are completely removed from material activities. You are qualified to describe the activities of the Lord. And he said, you should be very merciful upon those who are not so fortunate, and you should describe the activities of the Lord, so that these activities, by hearing them under the guidance of a pure devotee of the Lord, by medicinal doses they will cure them of their material diseases and protect them against all kinds of bogus information. And God knows we live in an age of bogus information. So much bogus information, disinformation and misinformation available. And that extends all the way up to Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. There is so much confusion about this. So this exchange between Narad and Lord Brahma is actually a very merciful exchange, because in the process of Lord Brahma answering Narad's questions about who is, I see you are offering respects to, I thought you were the cause of everything, but I see you are offering respects. Who are you offering respects to? Who is above you? And that leads Brahma to, in these chapters of this 2nd canto, and the revelation of so many details in very succinct statements about the pastimes of the Lord, which we understand as we read on in the Bhagavatam. There's so much elaboration of all of these things. Does anybody have any questions or comments today? Yes.
If Lord Brahma can see into the future, then point we eventually surrender. Yes?
Who can see that? I didn't catch.
If Lord Brahma can see into the future, then can he see that point at which each one of us eventually surrender to Krishna?
I don't know. That's like one of the questions. There was one, in the early days, there was one lady devotee was asking Srila Prabhupada all kinds of detailed questions about what goes on in the spiritual world. And Srila Prabhupada said, best you chant Hare Krishna, go back to Godhead and ask Krishna yourself. Actually, that's a very interesting question, though, because when we surrender to Krishna is actually the great unknown to everyone. Because in the purport to 5.15, where Prabhupada's talking about how Krishna satisfies all desires, and he makes the point that about the living entity. He says, because he is a living entity, he has the capacity to desire by his free will. So, surrender to the Lord is an exercise of our free will. And that remains a mystery when we will exercise that free will. One time Srila Prabhupada was asked about, well, on many times he was asked about how long does it take to surrender to Krishna? How long does it take to become Krishna conscious? And in one reply he said, you can become Krishna conscious in a moment, but that moment may take many thousands of lifetimes to reach. And it all depends upon your desire. So Krishna is aware of all our desires, and he's neutral. But when you actually desire him, then he helps you to desire him in such a way that you can come back to him. So even in that situation, though, we're resistant. We're resistant because our attachment to and our entanglement in the material world is very old and very deep. So I really can't answer that question myself. I don't know. I don't know when I'm going to surrender to Krishna. So I hope perhaps Lord Brahma does know, and he'll help me. But I don't have an answer to that question, really. Does anyone else?
I think you did answer, because you said that we have our free will, and it's up to us when we surrender. So no one knows that until you actually do it.
Yeah.
Which I think you already stated. And so even Krishna doesn't know that.
Yeah.
As you said, he's arranging things in such a way that it's very favourable for you to surrender. But he doesn't know when you're going to surrender. But as soon as you do it, he knows it.
Yes. 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 Yes.
And Lord Brahma is the same. Because he doesn't know, because it's our free will. We have to make that decision. So no one knows. Even Krishna doesn't know. But when we do make it, they immediately know. Oh, he's surrendered.
Yes. That's the point.
And also another point, another comment. I think that in the third court also there's the story of Sankachuda and everything like that, and why Prabhupada answers in his way about Lord Brahma and Nara talking about future events, because it's a little bit of a quandary here, because when the Rasa Leela dance was, I guess it wasn't the official Rasa Leela. Because he's saying the Rasa Leela was performed in first, in Kartika. But this pastime of Sankachuda
In Falguna.
And so they're 6 months apart.
Yeah.
So, but then you have the story of Sankachuda, being there while Krishna Balaram dancing with the gopis. So Prabhupada said that he's explaining it that they're predicting in the future what's going to happen, but sometimes it's not in the exact sequence of the events. But other acharyas have given a sequence of the events and when they happen. But I'm thinking that that's not like the official Rasa Leela that Krishna performs on the full moon night of the Kartik. And that one, because I've read there's many different types of Rasa Leelas. And that was one, but it seems that there's another instance where Krishna and Balaram were there together. So when Krishna performs Rasa Leela, he's there by himself with Radha and all the gopis. Balaram's not there. But it seems to be this story of Sankachuda, both Krishna and Balaram are there, and the gopis are there. But some acharyas say Balaram had his own gopis, and Krishna had his own gopis. They were dancing. But as far as Rasa Leela and Krishna with Radharani and all the gopis, that's a separate event.
Yes.
It may be that another explanation could be that this was just another time that Krishna and Balaram were dancing with their gopis, and then Sankachuda, that he came there. But as far as the Rasa Leela of Krishna and the gopis and Radharani, that was in Kartik, and this Sankachuda happened in the month of just after Holi.
Yeah, I checked that out, and I didn't want to go down that path too much, but
quite confusing.
Yeah, well, it indicates another thing. Well, first of all, this situation where Shankachuda shows up. Yes, Krishna and Balaram are there together, and it's not a rasa dance. They're simply, as it says here, they are singing sweet and melodious songs. And the gopis, it explains there that they are simply sitting and listening. That's one thing. The other thing is the point that Srila Prabhupada makes about how in the presentation of the pastimes of the Lord, we have to understand we're not so much concerned with chronology. We're schooled in the idea of, on the 1st of September 1983 this happened, and then a week later that happened, and so on, at this place at this time. But the pastimes of the Lord that are described in the Bhagavatam are not necessarily presented in that way. That's one thing. And the other thing, going back to your point about this free will business, there's that point, as you say, that Krishna doesn't know. That's actually there also in Bhagavad Gita. Prabhupada talks about this point very nicely in a lecture he gave in a series of lectures on the 2nd chapter of the Bhagavatam at the 1972 it was the first Vyasa Puja festival, first national festival of devotees in America, in New Vrindavan in 1972. And these lectures there's a series of lectures beginning with the 5th verse, where, and then through, I think, till the 12th verse, that are called the Bhagavad Dharma lectures. And in the lecture on Savai Pugsam Parodamo, at one point, Prabhupada's talking about this, of how we're free. And he says, just as Krishna says to Arjuna at the end of Bhagavad Gita, now you've heard all that I've had to say to you, you consider this, and then you do whatever you like. And then immediately Prabhupada says that you can do whatever you like is always there. Anybody can do whatever they like. So it's your choice. The point is, Krishna always leaves that in your, as they say, that ball in your court, because that brings us back to bhaktya. The essence of the teachings of Bhagavad Gita is that you surrender in love. Arjuna surrenders to Krishna in the beginning in ignorance and confusion about his duty. And then at the end he surrenders to Krishna in order to do his duty. And he said, I'm firm and free from doubt and ready to do as you ask. But it's only because he's become fixed in bhakti. And that bhaktya, Prabhupada, there's a beautiful little thing going around. I don't have my phone with me. I could actually play it to end the class, where Prabhupada is talking about bhaktya, how this bhaktya means love, and it only means love, nothing else. The essence of the surrender is to surrender to Krishna in love. And love, the point I'm making is, love can never be forced. You can't force anyone to love you. One enters into loving relationships as an exercise of free will. You can't force the matter. It's a matter of the heart, which has to be naturally awakened. So that Suddha Chitta, that purification that comes from Shravanadi, hearing, will actually reawaken that love and induce one to surrender to Krishna. But when that happens, it's really up to us. Always up to us. The choice is always there. Am I going to think of Krishna, or am I going to think of something else? The choice is always there. Yes. We run out of time. I'm sorry. Quickly.
I was just thinking how Prabhupada appeared. When Srila Prabhupada appeared, he manifested love. And even though people didn't know him very much, and probably making loads of so-called offences, etc., etc.
It's too close. You're holding it too close.
We were in ignorance, but Prabhupada's love awakened our love.
Prabhupada's love awakened our love. Yes. Yes. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.